All right, ladies and gentlemen, I need you to give it up for Brian Litzinger and Charles Kolner. I did it right. So there are a couple of fellow Minneapolis transplants, originally from Kentucky and Wisconsin, but we let them come anyway. A couple of interesting things before they get started. So they both work together at Jamf, and Brian is growing his first ever beard for No Shave November. So, all right, Brian, yeah, that's the kind of attitude we need, folks. And if you're hardcore, you're probably not hardcore as this guy. He sold his bike 5 years ago and now only bikes. Sold his car. Yeah, he sold his bike and now he bikes. No, he sold his car and now he bikes everywhere he goes. All right. He even biked here. It's a lie. All right, so please give it up for Brian and Charles.
Hi. So, is my audio good? It doesn't sound like I'm going through the speakers. Okay. Sounds weird. All right, so we are here to talk about A/B testing. If you saw Luke Summerfield's session yesterday, what? I can't control the volume. I can speak louder. Okay, I can hear myself now. All right, so if you saw Luke Summerfield's session yesterday, he, in his growth-driven design, he talked about testing and experimentation through that process, but he didn't really go too deep into it. So we're going to talk a little more about that, but we're not going to go too deep. We're not going to go into deep stats or show a lot of code, so we're going to stay kind of high level with this.
And let me flip my mic on quick. All right. Can everyone hear? Yes, we can. Cool. So I'm Charles Kolner. I'm a data analyst at Jamf in the marketing department. Brian and I work on the web dev team together, and I am very good at watching soccer. Arsenal's my favorite team. Go Gunners. I'm a great spectator of soccer. And I'm also a very proud dog uncle. Many dogs in my life. Here are a few of my favorites. I'm that guy that family and friends call when they need a dog sitter. Free unconditional love, good times.
Again, Brian Litzinger. I'm a Newcastle fan, so if you want to commiserate with me, the beers tonight. Some of you might know what I'm referencing there.
It's hard out there for Liverpool or for Newcastle fans.
There you go. And I'm again the guy behind Bold-Minded Add-ons. So as we mentioned that we are both from Jamf. Just a quick little summary of what we do. You've never heard the name, whatever. We make software, not us, but the company makes software that does mobile Mac management. So if you have a company or governments, Mac devices, iOS to manage, like install things remotely, that kind of stuff, that's what we do. So we're on the marketing team that actually manages Jamf.com, which is a very large, it's one of the largest ways that the sales revenue starts. So we're very responsible for getting the sales thing kicked off. So we make decisions on a daily basis on how we want to get people through their instant sales funnel. So when we do that, we want to use a little bit of science to help us make those decisions better. So we use A/B testing.
So just to get on the same page with everyone, right? A/B testing or split testing, right? These are some of the kind of the basic ideas of experimentation. Have anybody been involved in conducting any A/B tests, or maybe your company does that in certain ways? Okay, cool. Does anybody want to take a crack at just like a simple understanding or a definition of what that's all about? Okay, cool. Well, in general, when we're talking about digital marketing, it's essentially, we're just comparing multiple versions of a page, whether that's a web page or an application, and you're showing these different variations to similar visitors at the same time and at random. And it's effectively, it's driven by an outcome. In this case, conversion rate. Whichever one has the highest conversion rate is going to be the winner, and we'll promote that version. There's a little bit more to it, and we're going to work out a couple of statistical formulas here. So get your pen and paper ready. Just kidding. I know that it's lunchtime, so don't worry about that. But there is a little bit of stats involved, and tools can help you with that. So The general idea is it allows you to answer the question, how likely is it that these results are based on chance? If I repeated this experiment hundreds of times, are my results going to accurately reflect what's going on in true life, in the true population? And we're a B2B company, so most of what we focus on from an outcome standpoint is like generating leads. Maybe you guys are B2C. Maybe it's all about signups or subscriptions, or like a checkout process for e-commerce or something, right? These are the types of outcomes we're talking about trying to improve. So just a couple of basics, fundamental building blocks, like some prerequisites, right, to being able to take on this challenge, to introduce your company to an experimentation program, is learning the fundamentals. This is going to be high level. The purpose of this is not to teach you those fundamentals, but someone on your team is going to have to understand some terminology and concepts. Think about it like a new programming language. It takes a little bit of time in the beginning to get up to speed, but then you're kind of smooth sailing. And then next is process. We had a lot of smart people up here talking about how process is like the majority of what you should spend your time focusing on. You need a well-tuned process to kick this off. Think about it like your deployment schedule or a new feature release. You have a methodology that helps drive that and make sure that that's a successful project. So we'll talk about some process-related elements. And then lastly, goal tracking. You can't score without a goal, right? So please, for the love of God, have tracking on your websites. Otherwise, you don't actually measure outcomes. So we use free tools for that. Google Analytics, right? It's kind of a standard, basic free tool for folks out there. And you can actually use other free tools to deploy some of this custom tracking, like a Google Tag Manager, for example. So we just use free tools that we already had to get up and running, because tools are preference, right? We talked about that earlier as well. So here's just some foundational building blocks. I want to talk through just a couple reasons to believe. What are some advantages of trying to make decisions this way and incorporating this type of sort of thought process or approach to your business? So first and foremost, it's an objective way to make decisions. You're removing things like pre-existing or preconceived notions or assumptions, bias. We make a lot of decisions just based on gut feel. And my gut feel as a data analyst is different than his as a developer or a designer or a salesperson. So let's cut through that noise and let the data guide us. Also, this helps focus sort of everyone involved on what actions you take will drive which outcomes. So when you're oriented around this framing problems from, if we do this, we think this is going to be the effect. That helps everyone sort of gear around, here's the outcome we're driving, that's why we're doing this, rather than, I like a blue button instead of a green button. This also helps mitigate risk. This is something we talked about in the UX discussions on the other side here, which is basically a fail-safe way to validate or refute a standing assumption. So there's no failing. It's just we learned what worked and what didn't work. So the prospect of jumping in blind to a decision for me is very scary. I want to actually have some certainty. I don't want to think, I want to know. And then ultimately, too, you're going to be able to quantify the value of design decisions. That's a challenging thing for folks to do. But if you're aligning the value of your website against your business's outcomes, you can actually prove that your design decisions are having an impact on the bottom line. And then I would also argue that any like industry leader got there through a rigorous experimentation program. And you can read tons of case studies about how that helps you get beyond the competition. And then lastly, we have a lot of agencies and small dev shops in-house here. So this is a growth driver. You can package this as a capability in your statements of work. Could be a part of your retainer. If your your maintenance retainer, etc. So you can make money off this. Ultimately, it's going to help elevate the impact of your website. I would be remiss if I didn't mention there are challenges, especially up front. Here's some of those that we experienced, and then that's going to help just sort of guide our conversation about how we ended up getting over some of these. So culture is a big, could be a benefit, could be a huge barrier to getting this off the ground. Depending on how big you are, you might have a lot of different silos. There's brand standards and bureaucracy, and at most of the places where I've worked, whether it's client side or for an agency, the highest paid person's opinion or the hippo's opinion prevails, right? That has the highest weight. We move forward that way. We'll talk about how to get over that.
What's a hippo?
It is the highest paid person's opinion. And that's not my term, but I will gladly use it because imitation helps us grow. So, time and resource, right? We all have day jobs. This takes extra time and thought, especially in the beginning. We had to get sign off and budget. So we're a pretty lean team to say, hey, we're going to spend actually time on this. We're going to put this on our roadmap. And then lastly, setup and scale. This is something Brian's going to talk about more as it comes to implementation. This can't be a one-off tactic. I call it a program because it's a strategy you have to maintain. And then ultimately scaling, we at a certain point needed to seek help. So we actually scaled by outsourcing some execution work once we had a foundation grown. And that might be a route for some people, and we'll kind of talk through that as well. So we know what A/B testing is, we know what some of the basics are, why you do it, some hurdles. Let's just talk about the goal of the program at Jamf. This is how we sort of presented this to our organization. We wanted to convince everyone on our marketing team that this is how we need to make decisions about the website. Why are we going to jump in if we don't know? It allowed us to quantify the impact of our website on business outcomes because we were focused on driving those outcomes. And then it gave us this sort of roadmap to incrementally improve towards those goals. So for us, again, I mentioned we're a B2B company, so it's a lot about driving leads, qualifying them, handing them off to sales to go close. If you're a SaaS company, it's sign up, download. Maybe you're a media provider or outlet, you want subscriptions. We talked about e-commerce. Maybe you want a quicker checkout or a larger basket size, things like that. You have to know what the purpose of your website is, though, first. So that's actually a tough question to answer, depending on the stakeholder. We did a lot of things pretty well in the beginning, and we did some things kind of not so great. So some of the keys to success, things that if I had it to do over, I would have focused a lot more time on. And these are the things that we're going to delve into for the remaining slides. Stakeholder buy-in. You might have to have a proof of concept or a business case already in place for your boss to be like, oh yeah, this is a great idea, let's do this. So you need to get the time and money. You need to be able to prioritize what's most important. So you need an informed test plan because you don't want to run a test that's not going to have a big impact. You want ROI on the actions you're going to take. Brian's going to talk a lot about implementation. You need the tech setup. You need to be able to maintain it. And then it needs to be driven by an actionable process that's proven that can actually drive success. So these are what I would consider some essential elements of success. And I'm going to talk now about stakeholder buy-in. So we had to sort of convince executives or our bosses that Let's pursue this. So we used tools we had like Google Analytics, like Expression Engine to build this proof of concept to say, hey, we can do this. And we're a pretty scrappy team, right? We're a small team. I think there's like 4 people on our team. So we had to use what we had to get up and running. In order to generate that business case, we identified the areas most closely tied to business outcomes or website success. A lot of times this is like driving revenue, minimizing costs, or increasing customer satisfaction, right? Just a couple of ideas. And then ultimately, can you quantify the value, in our case, conversions? So we want leads, we want people to fill out forms and give us their names. Can we quantify the opportunity potential of impacting something like a conversion rate by just a little bit? So for us, when people request a demo, it just immediately pushes them further into the sales process, and it's typically a really short sales cycle. It's easy for our sales team to close. They love it. It's like a pot of gold, right? So I can actually determine that we spend this much on just getting users to our website. Here's how many convert, and then here's how many end up being in a closed deal, and this is the revenue we get from that. So if we impact the conversion rate by 5 or 10%, what might that impact be on revenue? And that's how you get your executive or your boss's attention. Next, having a test plan. This essentially focuses efforts on resolving pain points. We heard in the UX talk that it's all about identifying pain points and then trying to solve those from the user's perspective. So one of the things that we didn't do a lot of in the beginning was just consulting other people we worked with, like people in sales, people in customer support, or even designers, because everyone's going to have a different sort of angle or POV based on their understanding or interaction with our customers or our prospects. So that's rich information that just lives in your companies. You have to know what users are doing on your website, like right now. And again, please, for the love of God, have tracking on your websites. Otherwise, you won't be able to use this rich web data. Talk about things like scroll maps or heat maps, which we're visualizing here. It's what's your conversion funnel? How do users find you, land on your site? Where do they navigate to? What are drop-off points? These are all the whats that are going to help you sort of identify, ooh, this might be a pain point. And that's great. But you also need to know why users do what they do. And just web data, objective web data is just going to tell you the what. It's not going to tell you the why. So this is where surveys or feedback or even usability studies are going to help. For example, we incentivized our customer base to hey, give us 5-10 minutes of your time to fill out this and enter to win an iPad, because we just love to give out Mac devices. Also, if someone starts a demo but they don't actually submit it, it doesn't go through. Can we, non-invasively or non-intrusively just ask them the question, hey, why didn't you take that next step? Is there anything we could have done to help you get there? And that's also a very telling way to understand the pain points and then to focus your plan on solving for those to have the greatest impact. So this basically gives you this long laundry list of here's all the things we could do. Now let's rank them and have this roadmap based on if we do this first, it's going to have the biggest impact, then here, then here, then here, and it's kind of this cascade, and it's your workflow, it's your pipeline of tests. I'd say one thing that's would be super cool that I want to go do now is we have folks on live chat or people taking inbound requests on the phone. We have transcript data of those interactions. It's great information because that's the voice of your customer or your what once was your prospects. So you've got buy-in, you've got a plan. Now it's time to implement. And that's where Brian's going to talk to you through that a little bit.
Cool, it's my turn. All right, so as Charles said, now you have the buy-in, you have your plan, and now you need to actually build it. So again, at a high level, there are kind of two main ways to implement A/B tests. The first is client-side. That means you're going to use a tool, probably a third-party tool, that loads up your page, you give it a URL, and it basically turns your site into a big WYSIWYG editor, kind of like the old school Dreamweaver days or what you might see in Squarespace, that kind of thing. So those tools are basically let you manipulate the DOM. I didn't dig into the code, but I assume it's saving the changes referencing to like DOM elements, IDs, or maybe the XPath, whatever. So when the page reloads and the user is in the test, it just reapplies those changes. The other is server-side. So that means you're going to use a tool, in our case, Expression Engine, to build generally two different pages or two different URLs. They can be two entirely separate URLs, or they can be the same URL but have a query string identifier to make it unique. But something needs to be there to tell it which version is which, either the original or the variant or the challenger for the test. With client-side, you only need one URL because it's making those changes directly to that same page. But client-side also actually has a small, or server-side actually has a small client-side aspect to it. So client-side, you're embedding some JavaScript in the page that performs a test. Server-side, you also need a little JavaScript snippet as well, because if you're having two different URLs, you need to determine which URL the user goes to. So when the page loads, that JavaScript in the head is going to determine if the user stays on the original page or if they should be redirected to the variant very, very quickly. So for client-side tools, there are a few out there. You may have heard of these. These are kind of the big ones. There's Optimizely, there's Google Optimize, and Visual Website Optimizer, or VWO, which we are using. These companies are obviously very creative in their names. Surely they can come up with something else. So these tools, again, all client-side, but they don't only do A/B testing. They have other features as well. Some of them let you do like segment tracking. So if you want to perform a test to only somebody in Canada or Australia, you can do that. They also have other tools like heat maps, scroll maps. Also, these tools can be used for very professional reasons. Took a minute for y'all to see that, huh? This is actually after we installed VWO on our site, and our other developer was just messing around, and then 2 months later, somebody in our marketing team found it and just stumbled upon it. So, I made a smiley face, but we couldn't find the results of that. So these tools, like I said, they're SaaS tools, so they have an interface you log into. Here is just a quick video, not doing any live demos. This is what VWO looks like. So you log in, you give it a URL. There's other things you can do as well. You can say, like, should 100% of your audience be a part of this test or only 50%? So it loads the page in the browser, just like normal, and then its app loads on top of it. It takes a second to initiate. So all you do is you start clicking around the page, editing text, moving stuff around. Basically anything you do with CSS and JavaScript, you do in this app. So it's saving all these changes. And then again, when it displays to the user, it's going to reapply those changes.
Oh, and it reads the CSS off your page or whatever? Because it looked like you could apply classes.
Yeah, so you're jumping ahead of me. So that was VWO. So for a quick comparison, this is Google Optimize. I kind of prefer this one better because it's in the Google universe and the UI is a little cleaner. So once you log in, you say I want to create a variant, so you give it a name. In this case, it's only showing an actual A/B test, so one variant. You can do multivariant testing as well. So, to Adrian's point, one of the things I liked about this is it's apparently looking at the styles in your site and inspecting it. So in a second here, you're going to see when I'm editing the text color or a button color, it pulls the colors from your CSS to give you a predefined palette of what you can do. So for this reason, if you have like strict brand guidelines or style guides, it lets whoever is creating these tests to kind of stay more within that box. Obviously, you've seen the WYSIWYG editor. You can edit anything on the page, so somebody can easily go rogue and just blow your design all to hell. So what are the pros and cons of Clientside? It's easy and fast. You just saw me make 2 tests. There's, like I said, there are some other additional things you can configure for those tests, but that was the majority of it for a basic test. It's cheap. And I'm not really referring to the cost of the actual app itself, because Google Optimize is free. I think VWO might have a free 30-day trial, whatever. I'm kind of referring more to the cost of involving your dev team. So if you are not a developer, maybe you're a marketer or a content writer, all you need is your dev team to install that JavaScript snippet on the page, and then you can start creating tests. Later on in the process, though, when you're done with the test and let's say the variant or the challenger won, it means you're probably going to implement that actually forever on your site. So at that point, you might need to get your dev team involved to make those changes permanent, because again, at the client side, it's just temporary one-offs. The cons, there's less control, and this is a little contradictory. I'm not referring to what you can change, what you control on the page, but as somebody, a designer, or somebody responsible for managing the brand visual guidelines, whatever, you don't have control of that, because again, you can saw the WYSIWYG editor, somebody can just go off the range really quick. So if you're using this kind of tool, you probably want to educate your content editors or whoever is doing these tests. Here's our brand guidelines, here's our style guide. Stay within that box. Unless you're trying to do a really bold and big change, then they can go do what they want. There's also something called the flicker effect. This is, if you're a designer, you use custom fonts, you have the flash of font effect where it replaces the custom font on the page. There's a similar effect that can happen with the client-side tools as well, because again, it's reapplying JavaScript after the page loads. So if you have a lot of network latency or you're making a lot of DOM changes, the user might actually see your headline disappear or move or button color change. Sometimes that can actually have a benefit you in an unexpected way. When I was actually doing research for this, I ran across an article for a company that they had like your typical 3 product prices, your product comparison grid, and they had a little animation that crossed out a price to indicate that there's a sale price. So the animation just kind of drew a line through the old price. They ran a test on that page, and the JavaScript actually delayed that animation. So the animation was initially going to happen as soon as the page loaded. It was down kind of below the fold of the page. I want to come back to the fold because that's actually a thing, if you disagree with me or not. So the JavaScripts delayed that animation, so it actually had an adverse side effect to their test, because the user scrolled down the page and then the animation happened and actually drew the user to that spot. So they realized what was happening and implemented that permanently on their site. So that they intentionally delayed the animation for the permanent version, which drew more conversions. So I mentioned the fold thing a second ago. I was meant to talk about that with the heat maps. So the heat maps and scroll maps, I used to be somebody who really did not believe in the fold because websites scroll. There is a fold. If you put any scroll maps on your sites, you will clearly see that there's a certain point where users drop off.
And quickly, the difference there is because that's the user-centric view versus we built it, so we have a frame of reference. So that's just another, hats off to Susan. That's that UX point. Put yourself in your user's shoes.
Then there's server side. So again, for server side, Jamf.com is using Expression Engine. Specifically, this is a picture of blocks. When we first started doing testing on Jamf, we started with the server-side implementation, mostly because it was due to a result of a custom plugin I wrote for us to modify the output to blocks to create the nested hierarchy to open and close divs. That was actually the predecessor to the current version of blocks, if you're familiar with it, the nesting functionality. So in part of our testing too, we told our marketing team that we were only going to allow tests to be performed on pages that use blocks, which is most of our marketing pages, the landing pages, the key, informational pages. We weren't going to let them perform tests in the header and footer or our blog and stuff, because those are very programmatic and they're listing data. We don't want to go in and modify templates on a weekly basis to implement the test. So what this blocks layout here looks like on the front end for our site. Back up. So you see the blocks are repeating the slab, section, row hierarchy. So everything's based on that concept. It's basically just creating a grid layout for us. And what that looks like on the front end is we have 3 distinct slabs. So that's kind of how our site's built. We refer to everything as slabs. So in this screenshot, if we wanted to create a test to see if a different version of the calls to actions in that second slab might perform better, what we would do in blocks is basically create 2 different slabs or 2 different sections of blocks. Each section had a custom field that determined if that block and all its children were part of the original, or if its block and the children are part of the variant or the challenger. And what that would look like on the front end, when the test is not running, we see we have a 4th slab here with a different version of the calls to actions. This is not an actual test we did. Obviously, I'll just take our word for it for reals. I was just making a demo. So this is the test not running. So again, I said earlier that for server side, you need to be able to redirect to a different page. In this case, we actually have all the content in one page. So to make the experiment work, we use the plugin is looking for query string parameters to make it unique. So this is actually a screenshot from Google Experiments, which is deprecated and the predecessor to Google Optimize. But all those tools have the same kind of setup. You're performing a redirect A/B test. So give it 2 different URLs. In our case, the plugin is looking for if v equals 2, that's going to show the variant content, thus the 3rd new slab. If v equals blank or it's non-existent, it's going to show the original. So the page loads, product's jammed up. Jamf Pro, the JavaScript's going to determine if the user should stay on the page or be redirected to version 2. Then the plugin strips the second slab from the page and replaces it with the new version before the content's rendered on the server side. So the pros and cons of server side, there's more control. So again, I said earlier, the client side, there's less control. Because now, if you are the developer, somebody who maintains the code, you can put the user, the person creating these tests, in a box, and they can only edit and do things that you're kind of allowing them to do. So if you're going to go along, or if you're going to start implementing tests, you're going to need to define what they can test and kind of how they can test it. There's no flicker effect. So again, you're pre-rendering these pages server side. That JavaScript redirects that happens is very quick. The user's not actually going to see anything on the page rendered, and then the redirect is going to happen. So they're not going to realize they're involved in a test. So the cons, it requires development effort. So if you're going to start with this route, that means your dev team needs to get involved. And again, you're going to need to determine how you're going to test things and how you're going to implement this. So it's going to be a longer spin-up cycle. So if it's going, it could take you weeks or months or whatever to make your changes to make these tests be able to perform these tests. But as long as you have like a tool, like we said, we have Google Analytics, we have Expression Engine, we have the capability to kind of just start getting the ball rolling with this. This is a brand new slide I added just last night because literally yesterday in a session, Charles showed me an email that he got from Optimizely. They created an infographic and sent this out to people with a side-by-side of which works better for you depending on your setup. So there's client side and server side. So the slides will be available later or afterwards, but the URL's down there at the bottom. So I covered most of the topics that this involves, but there's actually several more that this covers, and it's really good information. So I just talked about this custom plugin I wrote for Jamf that does all this manipulation. It'd be pretty mean of me to stand up here and tell you that I wrote this custom thing that I can't give away. So last year, when I actually submitted this for a topic last year and it wasn't accepted, I started working on a new plugin called Experiments. It's basically the same concept you saw in that other screenshot. This is a new version of blocks. You add an atom with the field type, always show or variant. Always show means it can always be on the page regardless if it's the original or the variant, or you can determine if the block and all its children are part of the variant. It's designed to work specifically with blocks, but there is a non-blocks aspect to it. So to get this to work, all you do is wrap the blocks field with that tag. If you're not using blocks or using anything else, you can use the generic content tag, and you can see the original and variant tag pairs. So this also looks at the v equals 1 or v equals 2 parameter, and it will just basically remove that content from the page depending on which version you want to deliver. This is already on my site. You can get it now. I'm not going to make this a sales pitch. There.
Okay, so you learned some fundamentals. There's a lot of stuff out there that can help you get up to speed on concepts and terminology. Make sure you can set expectations. You've got the buy-in from your stakeholders or your boss. You have a plan and you're set up. You have an implementation. So now you need a proven process that's going to drive your program, just like an Agile or a Scrum methodology is going to drive other type of work. Like, think about it as a proven process. And it's pictured here as kind of a version of just the scientific method. We've all learned this a number of times. It's a simple step-by-step process to follow when thinking about experimentation. I'll mention there's a book called Lean Analytics Cycle, How to Build a Better Startup Faster. So they talk about this lean analytics, which is effectively a simplified or more catered version of the scientific method. So some other things that are really important about your process is you need involvement from other people and from stakeholders. So you have to be able to communicate results and expectations. And that's why knowing how a sample size impacts your test duration and some of these really, really fundamental concepts to understanding why this happens and to sort of ensure there's general consensus about why we're doing what we're doing and expectations around time. And then this is a process that it needs to be an iterative approach. It's not a one-off, like I said, it's not a one-off tactic. You're building a program based on maintaining a strategy. So, okay, great. Let's just talk about some examples of A/B tests that we've run. We'll show you some when we were a little more nascent, a little bit more like marketing focused, which is basically how do we get leads? We optimize forms and conversion points. So that was the way for us to get buy-in from folks because that's what they cared about the most. We're spending a lot of money to get people to land on these pages. Let's show that we can impact what's going on there. So this is like not accurately elongated with some of these blank spaces here, or it's not an accurate reflection of there's more space on these than there needs to be. But effectively, on the left-hand side, this is just a pretty long scrolling page. And on the right-hand side, it's basically, if you were to scroll, it's like half the size. So it's like, can we just simplify, remove some fluff, bring CTAs higher up, make them more prominent? We think that'll increase conversions. So that was the hypothesis of this test. If we do this, it's going to impact our outcome in this way. And in fact, this was statistically significant. So if we were to repeat this 100 times, we could expect that this result is not due to chance, it's because of our change.
This one, that previous one we saw, actually the challenger, the variant, had a 183% increase in conversions, just so I move the calls to actions a little higher in the page. This one is, the left is our original, the right is our variant or challenger. So this is kind of, the hypothesis behind this was very similar to the previous one, was to basically remove that hero image, simplify the content, and move the actual form higher in the page. You can see that the form right now is below the fold. So by moving the form higher and removing that fluff content, this actually had a 223.37% increase in conversions.
And then here's another version. You've seen a bunch. We've had lots of different versions of forms, right? Because that was kind of our entryway to getting this on people's minds within our organization. This is basically the same form, but we have sort of like a glossy, nice, pretty image on the challenger, which is on the right. And do you really think changing out a picture is going to have that big of an impact on someone filling out a form? No, it's not. It's a relatively small tweak, and you're looking for bigger differences between your versions because that's going to generate larger larger changes in your outcomes. The results are affected when you make big, bold changes. So this is an example of an ambiguous results. We couldn't say this statistically had any impact on people converting this form.
This one actually had about a 15% increase in conversions, so it's kind of pretty minimal. So we should preface this by saying, or I think we forgot to say that like these tests are unique to us. So just if you move something around your page or change a color or a button, it might work better for somebody over here than somebody over here. So you can't just assume. Before we started testing, I'm backing up and ad-libbing right here. Before we started testing, some of our marketers, they read articles like making buttons orange instead of blue converts higher.
Best practices.
Yeah, they were sold on this. Like they literally wanted to change the buttons from whatever to orange. So we ran tests and proved that's not the case. It really depends on what your site is doing and how it's designed, and everything else.
Our user audience is unique, as is yours. Their needs are unique. It can't be fit into a best practice scenario.
Yep. So this is another example of a test, our request trial form. This is a newer version of the previous slide we saw. So the one on the left follows what is arguably probably the best pattern for forms, which is label on top, form field below it. It's best for usability, accessibility, mobile, all that stuff. The one on the right, the hypothesis here was that by removing some of these form fields and creating a shorter form, that you get more conversions. So our idea on the dev team was to simplify the form by removing some of the additional city-state, zip, all those fields, and compacting it or consolidating it into one field where you put your organization name in, your company name. This actually hits the Google Places API, so it finds all that address data for you. So we still get that data when the user submits the form. So myself and the dev team, one of the other devs actually implemented this. But we were completely sold and convinced that this was going to increase conversions. We're making the form simpler. They only have to fill out 4 or 5 fields. In actuality, this one actually performed 6.2% worse than the original. Now, that comes with a caveat. This actually didn't run to its full 2 to 3 week test cycle because there's more things that come into play when you're running your tests, other environmental issues. In our case, we happened to start running this test at the end of a sales quarter, and our leadership saw that the sales were going down a little bit. They had no way to attribute that to the form directly, but they got a little scared, so we pulled the test prematurely. So if it continued running, it could have kept performing worse, or it could have ramped back up. We just don't really know. This is one that I would personally actually like to run on our site again at a different time of year. So again, the time of year you run a test could affect things. You don't want to make a sudden change and run a test on Cyber Monday instead of any other random day of the year, because you're probably going to get different results.
So we had some success, and I think this is planned just to show you kind of the differences in these 2 versions. We had some success kind of focusing on single elements that we know the executives care about, and then we got a little smarter because there's only so much we can do to a form to make someone fill it out. There's more to it than that. So what are some of those barriers for users that got in the way of them converting? Well, one of those things through doing a lot more research is that they didn't have enough information about which product fit them. We weren't giving them a fork in the road and giving them all the information they needed to say, yep, this is the product for me, I want to move forward. So armed with that intelligence, which again, research focusing on pain points, we're able to test a challenger on the right-hand side, which is literally, hey, take this step, then take this step, and take that step, trying to guide the users and give them that fork in the road. So again, it's not just one element. We're actually changing we're trying to modify our site based on the user's feedback and what they're experiencing.
The form on the right, or the field on the right, the page on the right, this is actually a design from the company we're using now basically taking over our A/B testing, because we were running a lot of them, and it was taking up a lot of time for our team. So we have actually outsourced that aspect of it, and this is the design they came back with.
Yeah, again, it's not a one-off tactic. You do have to maintain it. It got to a point where if we want to do this right, we need to put the amount of time and resource into it that's required. So that's how we scaled.
So here's another before and after, or the one on the right, is again the new design or new suggestion from the company we hired to take this over. So I mentioned earlier, as a designer or a brand advocate, you might want to stick within your your style guide. You can see on the right, we have big orange buttons now instead of the little pills. This is clearly, definitely not in our style guide. It makes me shudder a little bit. But things like this are the examples of some bigger, bolder changes that you might not feel comfortable with, but this company is suggesting it because they've seen proven results from that in the past. So basically, we're biting the bullet and going to run the test for a couple weeks and see how it does. You're not going to know what these changes are going to do until you actually try it out. That's the beauty of these tests. They're short-lived things. They're not permanent, so you can do whatever you want.
So we went through some examples. We talked through some of the things that we did well and then learned, that we didn't do well and then we learned and then we're doing better. Just to summarize a couple points, right? Like, you can start now. Ask for forgiveness later. It's a quote from every speaker. So start now. You have the tools. Most likely they're free or they're already bought and paid for. And then ultimately you can get dedicated budget if you prove the worth. Moving fast is very important too, especially if you want to make the greatest impact. So to move fast, you have to be aggressive and honestly ruffle people's feathers. People have, the hippos, right, have a very distinct understanding about how things should be done. You're going to have to make bold changes and ruffle feathers to drive quicker results. We wanted to encourage people to get involved and have some skin in the game. So we take bets on what's going to happen, and it's not personal. It's actually depersonalizes the decision making and sort of decentralizes any input that we would get that ends up driving a version that we test. And then I keep mentioning this, not a one-off tactic. It has to be a strategy and maintained. For us to do that properly, we had to outsource some of the execution work. It could have been a whole nother day job for Brian and I to continue to move the way we were moving, and it wasn't sustainable. So we outsourced some of that work to sustain it and scale it. I think one other benefit of the third party was, again, lots of POVs on our marketing team, designers, dev, business people. It can get contentious, right? Because there's a lot of money on the line, and we all care a lot about our business. So having a third party be able to sort of help
Referee?
Yes, thank you. That was actually a unknown benefit or unanticipated benefit of having that third party be involved and help guide us to kind of productive action.
Done.
Cool.
Okay.
What do you do as far as you don't take into account the tracking? You were talking about the click tracking or the mouse tracking on the screen.
Yep.
Do you take into account what version of the page is actually being displayed into that?
Yes. So we use things like scroll mapping or click tracking to actually help us know, we have an important element, but it's way at the bottom of the page, and people only scroll halfway there. So why would we put the most valuable thing on our page at the very bottom and no eyeballs see that?
Yeah.
Other ways, scroll maps, people typically follow their mouse when they're reading things.
No, that's not what I'm asking.
Okay.
So I know we've done some A/B testing and that kind of stuff, but the problem is that when you go in, we use Lucky Orange for our tracking. And when you look at the heat maps and everything like that, it's pulling up the current version of the site and showing you heat map layer at the top of the original version. That heat map time frame could be, some of that could be caught from the variant or the original, so you don't really know where
I think in VWO's case, it's actually saving the full image to the server somewhere. So it's not pulling the URL up and then dynamically drawing the heat map. I think it's at a certain time when that heat map's done or when we're running that test or enabling the heat maps on the page, we're not changing it at that point. So when it's done, it's like saving that last screenshot for us. I think, is that your answer? Or the answer you're looking for?
I guess, well, we're using like Google Optimize.
Okay.
So it's working independent of our heat map tracking. So it could switch the page out on you, but the heat map tracking, when you go to look at it a month later, it's showing you what the original version of the page, because it's not following the A/B testing.
I'm going to plead
because
the fifth on that one.
Yeah,
I'm not exactly sure how it handles it.
that's a tool issue because you're getting different things out of different tools. But we can actually talk about that offline if you want. I might have a couple of ideas or thoughts anyway.
What do you guys use to determine how long to run a test?
That's a great question.
What do we use to determine how long to run a test?
That's where you have to understand the fundamentals and the things that impact a test duration. You have to have a certain amount of sample size to register significant results. So it's typically a function of what level of confidence do I need to ensure that, okay, cool, I'm going to call this significant. And then what level of sample size I need based on how many how many users how many users come to that page in a given time frame. So that's actually, I'll illustrate this a little bit. We have like landing pages that are just devoted to advertising, right? And there's not a lot of traffic that gets to those. That's not the best place to start testing because it takes so long to get enough results for both versions to tease out, okay, yes, this change is significant. So there are a number of tools that are just out there that you don't have to do the math or the formulas. You just plug in, here's how many users get to this page in a given month. Here's our conversion rate, current conversion rate, and here's the expected increase that we want. And it'll effectively say, okay, cool, within this confidence interval or within this level of certainty, expect this to take 2 weeks. Like, there are tools that'll help you do that without having to do the math.
So if you create a new feature and you don't have an original or a variant, just a bunch of opinions on, or self-contained opinions on how it should look, how do you employ an A/B test in order to determine which of your opinions is better? And at what point do you as a company sort of go, okay, we got to use opinions here and can't really fall back on previous research or that kind of, at what point does it get too granular to do this for you?
Yeah, I think we have made new things and actually changed 2 versions of the new thing and run a test at the same time. I have something else to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's all informs your test plan. So I want to know people's assumptions, and we want to question those. And that's what you're testing. So if one version is just an assumption and another version is a contrasting assumption, then you will see which one prevails in this scenario. I may have answered that, maybe didn't, but
I'll ask.
please do.
Get one in the back.
So with the variants and everything, are you guys, especially with responsive web design, when you make the change, is that mobile and desktop and you're looking at comparison, or are you sometimes just A/B testing only desktop or mobile, only mobile?
The question is, do we test only mobile or desktop or both? I think the answer to that is we primarily focus on desktop. I don't know if we've run any mobile specific tests yet.
And that is largely because like 75–80% of our site users are on a desktop. Folks don't really check out our site unless they want to like get hired or see where we're located or something on their cell phones.
Yeah.
So do you guys actually control that to, because if you have a responsive site, are you actually controlling that to where it doesn't change the mobile experience?
Through some of the client-side tools, there are ways to do segmentation and say, I only want to have these types of users. I mean, you might even be able to get as specific, again, if you have enough sample to say, just show me this browser type, or just show me users in Germany, or something like that. So there is that flexibility to segment out groups.
I think someone's wrap it up, so we're done.
Thanks, folks.
Please use the feedback. This is the last time I'm going to call and mention that, since I'm the one trying to get that feedback. So please use it.